Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply, and this video is to bring you a closer look at the Bommer number 5010-407-632. This is a wide throw hinge, as you can see. Looks unusual, a wide throw hinge, when it's opened or closed. That's what this is. It's a nice hinge. The polished brass finish is nice on this, even though it's a plated over steel sort of base. Now, let's dissect the part number. The 50 in the part number is going to mean full mortise. You can see from the swag on the hinge, on the hinge leaves there, that the leaves are meant to be mortised flush to the edge of the door and the frame when they're brought parallel like they are now. Also means that it's a 5-knuckle hinge and that it's plain bearing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Plain bearing, there are no ball bearing packets in there at all. Now the 1 in the part number means wide throw. That means that the hinge will be wider than it is tall, and it's ultra important to realize how hinges are called or defined in terms of dimensions. This is a 4x7, and you can see what dimension is 4 and what would be the 7. But the key is the height is the first dimension. So 4x7 it'd be 4 inch tall and 7 inch wide. Okay, well that makes sense, but keep in mind it's the same logic if you had a 5x4.5 or a 4.5x4, the height is the first dimension. Now, this compared to a standard 4x4, you're going to have an extra inch and a half dimension from where a vertical axis of pivoting would be for a standard 4x4 hinge all the way out here, which is going to give you a lot more clearance when that hinge or that door is open to 180 degrees. So a 4x7, not very common for us to sell because it is so much wider than a 4x5 or a 4x6. But if you need to get, what would be basically your vertical axis of pivoting an inch and a half further out, you would go with a hinge that would be an inch and a half further out would be a hinge that's 3 inches wider. Okay. The 0 in the part number there after the 1 means that this is a steel-based hinge. Okay, as that magnet will attest. The 407 is the size, 4x7. We went over that. The 632 in the part number means two things. Again, it means that it's made of steel, which we demonstrated earlier, plus it means that it is in a polished brass finish. Now this hinge is going to be available in every practical finish possible. 600 prime coat, 601 bright black japanned, 603 zinc, 604 dichromate they can probably do. You're going to get into 625, you will get into a 632 polished brass, 633 satin brass, 652 satin chrome, 651 polished chrome, 639 satin bronze, 640 oil rubbed bronze, 647. A 646 would be a satin nickel finish, etc. There's Bommer and wide throw hinges are generally made to order, so there's a factory lead time if we don't stock them. But Bommer is, they will absolutely entertain a custom finish request on it, be outside of your standard brass, your bronze, your chromes, things of that nature. Now, there is a link below this video to a document called Cut Sheet, and let's go over that now. And the important part of that is you will see all of the dimensional properties of the hinge as it pertains to a 4x4, a 4x5, a 6-inch wide, and a 7-inch wide for the different 3 primary classifications of hinges. You're going to have your steel hinges, which would be either a 5,000 or a 5010, which would be a wide throw. You can do an 8,000 hinge, which would be a 3-knuckle. But specifically, as it comes to wide throw hinges, you're going to deal with either a 5010 plain bearing or a BB 5010, which will give you a bearing packet here and here. A great idea if you are dealing with a door that has any sort of weight, any sort of volume. And quite frankly, if the cost difference is really not a problem, go with ball bearing, because that investment in the ball bearing will pay off years down the road. You compare any hinge 20 years later to a plain bearing to a ball bearing, and you'll see where that investment paid off. There will be significant areas of wear between the knuckles. The door will start to hang improperly, will tip into the opening, will not operate correctly, certainly won't close right, etc. So from that cut sheet, you can see how the part number changes as the base material changes. The 0 in the last space there is steel, 1 is brass or bronze, and 2 is stainless. You can see how you can go from plain bearing to ball bearing. So you can do 5-knuckle hinges wide throw in any of the 3 base materials, plain bearing or ball bearing. Leaf thickness 130 thousandths, that's considered standard weight for a commercial grade hinge. And you can also do this as a heavyweight hinge, but that would be something about 180 thousandths or 178 thousandths, something like that in terms of leaf thickness. That's very unusual for a wide throw hinge. Generally, if you're dealing with a wide throw hinge, you're dealing with a hinge that's not load bearing, because they really aren't tested or carry a load rating at all when it's a wide throw. And actually that's an argument for ball bearing regardless. Although it does drive the cost up, so plain bearing is the hinge that we would most likely stock to begin with. So you've got the dimensions there of the hinge, all of the important dimensions. You've got the way that the part number changes when the base material change, and whether it's plain bearing or ball bearing. Where is an extended wide throw hinge used? Any instance where you have to get yourself out around, let's say, a wall condition, a casing condition, maybe brick mold or shutters have been applied. It's not that unusual, actually. If you have a job where you want to, or your client wants to have the door open 180 degrees, and you have a condition like this, where there's a certain amount of inset that's happening. And while I've kind of drawn it backwards, let's just complete the drawing here. So you can see that if your normal vertical axis of pivoting, or your hinge knuckle of a standard hinge, is about here, if you want that door to open up to 180 degrees, you're probably going to have to pull that vertical axis of pivoting out further. So that's where a wide throw hinge will come in, where the frame is inset into a wall. Not a very common wall construction is 8-inch block with a 5 3/4 frame, and that frame is centered in the 8-inch block. So you're going to have a condition where you've got to move that axis out because your client may want the door to go to 180 degrees, that sort of scenario. So where the frame is set in is one place that you'll use it. You might simply have a regular installation where you have applied thick casing or brick mold, or shutters have been applied and you need to move it out. Or you might have a condition where you have a very deep frame, a thick wall, and the door has a significant inset. You know, when you stand on the pull side of the door, and if you were to run your hand over the face of the door and frame, the door is kicked in generally a very small amount, about 3/32 of an inch. It can be flush, but it's generally kicked in a little bit. Well, imagine if that inset was an inch, or an inch and a half, or whatever dimension. I've been in the first Capitol building in the state of Iowa is full of wide throw hinges. I mean, there are dozens of pairs of them. Very thick walls, very large, gorgeous wood frames, and those doors are set in the middle of what might be 18-inch walls. So they have these absolutely seriously wide throw hinges. And while that's very unusual, and historical hinges like that would be basically all but irreplaceable by current standards of economy, that's a perfect analogy where you could understand they needed those doors when the building was built to open back up and around, and the only way to do that is to move that vertical axis of pivoting way out to allow the door to get out and around. 100-plus-year-old homes in Florida that I've been in have very thick walls, but they're 3 stories high. Same sort of scenario. If you're thinking of wide throw hinges, you might need an extended lip strike plate. We can help you with that as well. Bommer doesn't make those, but we have another company that specializes in strike plates. So We've talked about the hinge, the part number, where it's used, all the variations available, except to say that you can also get this in a security pin, where there would be drilled and tapped into a barrel, into a knuckle here, a set screw, and the hinge pin would have a groove cut in it so that when you tighten the set screw, it would fit into that groove so you couldn't drive the pin out. You would certainly want a security pin hinge in an exterior door that swung out. So keep that in mind. And I've seen very neat, interesting applications of wide throw hinges where someone wanted to have actually 4 doors. The first 2 would flip around, and then the outer 2 would actually flip around and go to 180 degrees. So they needed wide throw hinges for that. I've seen that in commercial, residential applications, but I've also seen it where someone literally had 4 panels, and one would tuck back this way, this would tuck back this way, and the third one would fold back over the fourth one. And they had these increasingly large wide throw hinges to account for that. Anyway, there is a link below this video to the manufacturer's page where you can pull up not only all of the Bommer products that we sell, but a link to the manufacturer's website, along with a link to the full product catalog, where you can view all things hinge related. Now, Bommer's most widely known, really not for hinges like this, even though they are, but what they're most widely known are for their spring hinges, and in particular their 3029 series of double acting spring hinges, which you see all the time. That's the Bommer hinge. The last thing I'd like to point out to you is the Bommer logo, and right above it it says Made in USA, a fact that Bommer is quite proud of, as am I to represent them. By the way, screws are included for both. You'll get all wood and half machine for an application like this. Okay. Any questions on this or any other Bommer product, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.